There's this trope in modern fiction that's always intrigued me. When a character is bullied in a piece of fiction, there are a few ways that plot strand can be resolved. And since this channel is pretty anime-centric at this point, I'll give you some weeby examples. Number 1. The character's makeup. The bullied character grows to understand and befriend their bully, or the two characters simply resolve their issues and become friends. For example, Hajime no Ippo, with Makunouchi Ippo and his bully Umezawa. Same in My Hero. It starts with Bakugo literally telling Deku to kill himself, but as the story goes on, they become good friends. It might not look like it in the anime yet, but trust me, they actually become very good friends. Number 2, another way of solving this narrative strand. The bullying is just sort of overcome and the entire narrative with the bullies is forgotten, and the narrative isn't really given too much depth in regards to the bullying theme. This usually happens in longer running shows during the start of its run. For example, Sakura was bullied for her forehead. That really isn't brought up again in Naruto. Blue Exorcist. Does anyone remember this guy from the first episode? Not really. Kenichi is bullied for a little bit in Kenichi, the Mightiest Disciple, but he becomes so powerful and strong so quickly it becomes impossible to bully him. And the third way to resolve a bullying storyline in a piece of fiction. My personal favourite way. My favourite way in which a bully-centric storyline can be solved is when the victim character attempts to get revenge on their bullies. For example, Misa Miso, Revenge Classroom, Ichi the Killer, King of Pigs, Elfen Lied, Hellgirl, Masamune-kun's Revenge, and of course, Pumpkin Knight. If you know your stuff, you may have noticed something about the examples I gave for this type of resolution. The properties that have a bullied character getting revenge are a lot darker than the ones that don't. These stories also seem very strange, in the sense that the characters who are getting bullied are portrayed as characters we, the audience, are supposed to sympathise with, and some may even empathise with said characters, which makes this type of resolution of a bully storyline very strange to me, as I can imagine people putting themselves in a character's shoes and imagining themselves getting revenge on their own bullies, making these types of storylines sometimes feel like revenge self-inserts, escapes from reality in which the victim can do what they want to their torturer. Whenever a character is bullied in a piece of fiction, it's either incredibly cartoonish and caricature-like in nature. For example, a character simply getting beat up for no reason, like in Bleach, where Chad gets bullied and beaten up by some unnamed goons. All the bullies act in a needlessly grotesque and evil way to the point of sadism for some reason, and sometimes it can even be both caricature-like and ridiculously grotesque, such as in the case of Misa Miso, in which a girl who is being bullied for reasons I won't mention because of spoilers, but the way her bullies decide to mess with her is by burning her house down whilst her family is still inside, killing both her parents as well as her younger sibling, or at least injuring them. This is both cartoonishly evil to the point where I question the author's choices, and also insanely brutal. I mean, all of Misa Miso is like this, to be honest, and it's actually quite surprising that the author behind Misa Miso is also the creator of High Score Girl, of all things. Anyway, the point I'm trying to get across here is that if you like this little niche subgenre of fiction, which I will aptly title Bully Revenge Porn, Pumpkin Knight is perfect for you. Before I can actually talk about what Pumpkin Knight is and show you what manga panels I can, I've got to give a little disclaimer. If you do decide to take my recommendation, or even just watch the rest of this video, be aware that Pumpkin Knight is pretty brutal. It's incredibly gory and, as I said, brutal, as well as oddly pervy at times, so bear in mind that it is very much not for younger people. With that out the way, let's go over the first chapter, the intro of the story, just to give you a little taste of what Pumpkin Knight is about. A girl is sitting alone in her bedroom, scrolling through Twitter before she goes to bed, until she gets a new follower. She stops. She doesn't recognise the name or the profile, the Pumpkin Knight. She has a quick laugh at the outlandish mask in the photo and proceeds to follow the user back. The new follower then immediately messages this girl. Asumi Nakatani, it's time to die. Asumi then visibly panics, wondering how the user knows her full name, until she is met with the doorbell ringing downstairs. Who's at the door? It couldn't be. It's not possible. She's home alone, petrified. The doorbell rings again. Asumi grows more and more tense until she realises that she can check who's at the door just by peeking out of the upstairs window. She fearfully takes a quick peek at the figure posed at her front door. It's too dark outside. She can't make them out. Thankfully, she catches a glimpse of an Amazon logo, immediately calming her down and leading her towards the front door. She opens the door and something isn't right. Something's wrong with the delivery man. He collapses on top of Asumi. He's sticky. The man falls to the floor, revealing that he was oozing with blood, and during his collapse he covered Asumi with his innards. Asumi looks down to see that his skull is being caved in from behind. Asumi looks back up to see that the delivery man's killer, the Pumpkin Knight, adorning a blade that has been crudely taped to another, is staring above her. The Pumpkin Knight smiles while Asumi's face falls in terror. The killer attempts to bring the knife down on the girl, but is stopped by Asumi quickly closing and locking the door. She's in total shock. It's him. It's the Pumpkin Knight. What does she do? She debates calling her parents or the police, but overrules them and decides to call someone else. Kazuya. She begs for help until Kazuya quickly interrupts her. Naoko has escaped. Naoko Kirino, the two's classmate back in junior high. She was admitted to a mental hospital, but this morning she killed all the nurses and patients and escaped. Kazuya exclaims that it's even on TV. The person the two kids have bullied has escaped. Throughout this conversation, the Pumpkin Knight has been drawing closer. They raise their knife up and bring it down into Asumi's back. The blade is so deep into her spine that it nearly reaches the handle. This, of course, horrifies Asumi, much to the killer's chagrin. The killer quickly pulls out the blade and spins their weapon around to the serrated spoon on the other side. Asumi drops her phone in fear. She pleads, now realising that this is Naoko, begging for forgiveness. Naoko remains silent and slashes a serrated tool across Asumi's face, removing one of Asumi's eyes and leaving the other hanging on by its optical nerves. Kazuya hears all the commotion and starts asking questions through the phone. What's going on? The now blinded Asumi walks away from her attacker, fumbling through the darkness, pleading for the pain to stop. Meanwhile, Naoko simply follows behind, with phone in hand, grinning all the while. Asumi then manages to stumble in open traffic. Due to Asumi now being blind as well as it being nighttime, Asumi is hit by an oncoming truck. Passers-by go to the scene trying to help, but Asumi was dead on impact, mangled. Naoko smiles, bringing Asumi's phone to her face. Hearing Kazuya's panic, she grins wide. Asumi is no more. She's dead, and you're next. I had to cut out a lot of the gore out of this little snippet of the manga, as the pages are way too graphic to put on YouTube, so bear in mind that if you do go ahead and read this, it's incredibly gory. So now I'll give you a brief synopsis on the story overall of the manga, or at least its first major arc, as the story isn't actually finished yet as the manga is ongoing. However, despite that, I still think it's worth the read, so let's jump into the story. The story of Pumpkin Knight is pretty simplistic, like really simplistic, at least in the beginning. Anyway, before we get into the weird baby stuff, a group of teens bully Naoko to the point where it reaches elfin-lied levels of kids committing random acts of evil. It even gets to the point where this group of bullies put Naoko in a Carrie-like situation, but instead of Naoko becoming prom queen and being covered in pig's blood, she is instead becoming the Halloween queen and is covered in fireworks and set alight, permanently disfiguring Naoko and causing her to be sent to a mental hospital. But, as you saw in that intro, she breaks out of the hospital, killing anyone who stands in her way and her path to revenge. It's a pretty simple revenge story, and that's not a bad thing. It allows the manga to focus more so on each character's interactions with each other, as well as how Naoko interacts with everyone after her mind snapped. The story itself seems to be what My Hero Academia is to Western comics. My Hero Academia is a love letter to Marvel and DC and all Western comics. Pumpkin Knight is the same, however, it's clearly not following the tropes of Western comic books like My Hero. Pumpkin Knight follows the tropes and narrative patterns of the horror genre, more specifically the subgenre of a slasher film. If I were to simplify the plot even more, I would say Pumpkin Knight was about an insane killer who breaks out of a mental institute to kill some dumb teenagers. Doesn't that plot sound a lot like some of the classics of the slasher genre? However, there is one difference between the majority of slasher killers from the 80s and 90s and our oh-so-lovable Naoko here. Naoko isn't 100% dumb. She isn't a genius, sure, she gets caught off guard like a lot, and she is also bat-ish insane, but despite that, she doesn't fall into the trope of the killer being dumber than a sack of bricks. For example, one of Naoko's victims gets put into an incinerator as she's trapped inside of a coffin and is about to be cremated. Somehow, she miraculously survives. Naoko then tracks down her victim to her hospital room and kills all the doctors in the room and electrocutes her victim. Realising this is a golden opportunity, Naoko butchers her own face so she can disguise herself as her victim and sneaks under both the police and her past bully's radar, showing off how truly mental and both dumb and not dumb she is. Still kinda dumb, I'm not gonna lie, it's just very twisted and intriguing. Speaking of twists, the story has some twists and turns, some mutations, some romances, and even some trumps. Overall, the story of this manga is really goofy and outlandish, just like the slasher movies that inspired this narrative, clearly. Try not to take it too seriously. It is very clearly not intended to be taken seriously. If you like slashers or horror in general, you should be fine with this narrative, especially if you're the type to watch Saw kill compilations on YouTube, because I can't even put most of the deaths in this manga in this video due to how graphic they are. Characters. As I said earlier, the narrative is standard horror fare, dumb teenagers. The mass majority of them are clearly just cannon fodder for Naoko to slash through. The only characters of note in the first arc of this manga are Naoko herself and Kazuya. I've already said a fair amount about Naoko, so let's move on to Kazuya. But not too much because I want you to read the manga yourself. Kazuya was part of the friend group that bullied Naoko. However, he never took part in the act, always being a bystander and never having the courage to help her, despite Naoko and Kazuya having a crush on each other. His character mainly centers around him feeling guilt for what happened to Naoko on the day of the Halloween festival, despite him never having anything to do with what happened. The rest of the characters are pretty two-dimensional. I forget their names, to be honest. And Kazuya and Naoko aren't exactly deep either. We have the cold, gritty detective who wants to solve the case. We have the corrupt official Mayor Kuroki, who is actually the father of one of the bullies. Most characters who show up are either bullies or characters who get killed instantly by Naoko. So in regards to character depth, it's kind of meh, which yet again isn't necessarily a bad thing. Seeing the equivalent of cardboard cutout characters getting slashed apart isn't a bad thing. It's what the slasher genre has thrived on for years. So yet again, if you like slashers or you just want some cathartic bully slashing, I think you'll enjoy it. Speaking of bully slashing, let's talk about how the slashing looks, the art. For a series that seems quite niche and underground, the artwork is actually really good. It's very expressive and detailed, especially when it comes to the gore, and it makes good use of shadows and darkness when emphasizing its horror elements. Don't get me wrong, this artwork isn't the next Berserk or Jagan or anything like that, but it does look better than I expected given its relatively small popularity. But just look at these shots. Most of the detailed shots from the manga are filled with blood, guts and gore that I can't really show on YouTube, but check out these ones that I can't show you. All I can say is that the artist can draw. In conclusion, overall I think Pumpkin Night is a very underrated series. Yes, the majority of its characters lack depth, but over time that does change a bit, but I can't really talk about that character development because of spoilers. It has some pretty dope artwork, some pretty great kills, and gore if you're into that stuff. I'd personally rate it like a 6-ish or a 7-ish out of 10. Bear in mind that my personal scale has like the Berserk manga at a 10 and the Tokyo Ghoul anime at a 1. So like a 6 or a 7 is pretty respectable. One thing to bear in mind when trying to read this series, however, is that there aren't any official translations. So your best bet is fan translations, and the most popular and prevalent translation is problematic. Problematic in the sense that it isn't accurate. The translation you'll more than likely find when trying to read this series is by Chillock Translations. I'm going to be real with you. You're either going to love or hate these translations. I personally don't mind them. They grow on me and I chuckle at them from time to time, but I can see why some people would be put off by the lack of official translations and a lot of the edgy jokes and shitposts that are forced into this horror manga. But to be honest, as I said, when I was talking about the story, this narrative isn't 100% serious, so I can get over the goofy translations and chuckle at them from time to time, but if you can't, it might be a bit harder to find another fan translation. Also, the author of Pumpkin Night, Masaya Hokazono, I butchered that name, has made a few other manga of note that I might talk about in the future. Stuff like Killing Morph, Emerging, one of my personal favourite ongoing series, Freak Island. However, he has a problem with starting a manga series and not finishing them, or abruptly finishing them without a real ending. I mean, the man is really getting on in his years, but it gets really annoying when you get into some of his older works, which makes me very fearful for the future of this series. Anyway, as I said, Pumpkin Night as an actual manga is pretty okay, pretty decent so far in my opinion. I like old slashers, I like goofy horror, and I like trumping manga, which is a little niche in of itself, so it was perfect for me. A solid 6-ish, 7-ish out of 10. And yeah, if you can, please try to find a way to support the author so we can get like an official vids translation, or at least a way to read them online in an official capacity at least. Anyway, that's why you should read Pumpkin Night, and time for the outro. Hello, thanks for watching, and let me know what you thought of this type of video. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to let me know, and there's any other niche horror stuff or just anything you want me to talk about, yet again, please feel free to let me know. We also literally just hit 6k subscribers as I was editing this video, like literally right now. So yeah, thank you all again for the continued support, and thank you again for watching. That being said, toodles my doodles, I'll see you in the next one. Peace.